to America's News Now with me, Taylor Gilmore, and my co-hosts Tatiana Cataverio and Alex Cortez.
Today we will be discussing our national budget, the current presidential candidate's views on economic policy, the state of American economics abroad, and the global outlook of 2016.
So Tati, how do you feel about Donald Trump's plan to have single citizens who earn less than $25,000 and married citizens who jointly earn less than $50,000 not owe an income tax? All other Americans will get a simpler tax code with 4 brackets instead of the current 7. No businesses of any size, from a Fortune 500 to a mom-and-pop shop to a freelancer working job to job, will pay more than 15% of their business income.
That seems a bit excessive. I don't know how that will pan out with the American people.
Well, how about Ted Cruz's idea of a simple flat tax? He believes that the best way to jumpstart growth is through a fundamental tax reform. Under the Ted Cruz simple flat tax, the current 7 brackets of income tax will collapse into one single rate of 10%.
I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that'll solve the issue. But how do you feel about Hillary Clinton's plan to give working families a raise in tax relief? That helps them manage rising costs, create good-paying jobs by investing in infrastructure, clean energy, and scientific and medical research to strengthen our economy and growth. Close corporate tax loopholes and make the most fortunate pay their fair share.
I think she's focusing too much on the middle class and not enough on the corporate spenders. That could cause a loss of support in Washington.
How about Bernie Sanders' plan on demanding that the wealthy and large corporations pay for their fair share of taxes? As president, he will stop corporations from shifting their profits and jobs overseas to avoid paying U.S. income taxes. He will also create a progressive estate tax on the top 0.3% of Americans who inherit more than $3.5 million. And he will enact a tax on Wall Street speculators who cause millions of Americans to lose their jobs, homes, and life savings.
Well, since we're not politicians, I think we should go over to Alex Cortez, who is with 2 senior senators.
I'm here live in Washington, D.C. with our senior senators, Tia Bravo and Madison Haley, both of which have served for over 20 years and passed many bills having to deal with our budget. Can one of you please explain what the monetary policies are?
Fiscal and monetary policies are what make up economic policy as a whole. Fiscal policy is the taxing and spending that the government does, as well as the government's budget. And monetary policy is the government's regulation of money supply in order to control inflation and deflation. It also deals with the adjustment of interest rates to regulate our economy.
So how can the government achieve regulation?
Through the Federal Reserve System, which was founded in 1913 and acts as our central banking system. The Fed controls interest rates, which are especially important to the big banks such as Wells Fargo, Chase, and Bank of America.
Some people argue the government has too much control over our money. How would you respond to this controversy?
Well, the government has to control our money. With trillions of dollars going into the budget every year, normal people wouldn't know what to do with the money or how to allocate it.
So how is the budget controlled today?
Well, prior to 1974, Congress had no formal budgeting process. The Congressional Budget Act of 1974 created the Congressional Budget Office, which in turn directed more control of the budget to Congress rather than to the president.
And how does the budget go about being passed?
Well, the president and the OMB work on creating their ideal budget, which then gets submitted to Congress. It is then referred to the House and Senate budget committees and then to the CBO. Each committee submits a budget resolution to its House. And finally, with amendments to the resolutions, the budget gets passed and put into action.
Thank you for your time. We'll be right back after the break.
Okay. Do you want to save your country from bankruptcy? Are you tired of hearing about our national debt?
Yeah, I'm tired of it.
Do you know how you can help out?
No, how?
Buy a bond. Oh wait, not that bond. A treasury bond.
What's a treasury bond?
You loan money to us and we pay you back with interest every 6 months until it matures.
Wow, I think I'll buy a bond. Yeah, me too. And you're coming with me.
And now we'll move on to a segment where Senator Klobuchar is speaking out about increasing controversy on America's economic state.
Hello, I'm Senator Amy Klobuchar, and I'm a member of the Joint Economics Committee. I'm eager to bring you a report on the state of American economics abroad. For too long, we have imported far more than we export. Around 95% of the potential customers in the world live outside of the U.S., and yet under 1% of American businesses are able to reach those customers. We must increase opportunities in exporting if we hope to be competitive, especially with foreign nations like China. I'm working on the Innovate America Act, which could create around 100 specialty schools in STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and math. Being globally competitive is essential because we do have a long-term deficit. In 2010, I worked on a national commission on fiscal responsibility. Many of the ideas that we had then are the basis for the discussions we're still having now. We have done work which reduced the deficit by 2/3 since 2009, and pushing for these sound policies is what I will continue to do as Senator of Minnesota. Taking China as an example, the U.S. trade deficit with China, according to the Huffington Post, reached $1 billion per day in 2015. That would be a $365 billion deficit per year. With the lift of China's illegal export subsidies and the increase in sweatshop labor, pollution havens, and undervalued currency, the deficit only continues to grow. Take, for example, an F-22, a U.S. fighter jet, which costs around $360 million to produce. We could currently deploy 187 of these jets due to their high cost. The Chinese clone of the F-22 costs about half of that to make, due to the cheap labor and them saving all of the money on research and design. With a little over 1 month of its surplus with the US in trade, China could completely replicate our F-22 air wing. They could pay for 1,000 of these planes in less than 6 months. 1 day of trade buys 1,000 new cruise missiles, and a little over a week finances at least 3 new Chinese aircraft carriers. Additionally, Fortune reported in May of 2015 that while the increase in exports had skyrocketed 7.7%, the increase in exports had only increased 0.9%. These discrepancies with our foreign competitors cannot be allowed to persist. Drastic action must be taken by the government to remedy the situation, or we will only be digging ourselves a much deeper hole. Thank you.
Have you given any thought to buying a U.S. Treasury bond?
No, I haven't really thought about it much. What is a treasury bond?
You loan us money to help us lower our debt while we pay you back with interest tacked on once it matures.
Okay, I think I'll buy one.
Mommy, I want a bond too.
Okay, sweetie.
No, not that bond. I want James Bond.
You can't have James Bond, but I can get you a treasury bond to help our country.
Okay, I'll settle for that. America needs you to buy a treasury bond today.
Now we will be moving on to a segment on the global outlook of 2016. The volatility in financial markets speaks to the growing importance of China to the global economy. As growth forecasts for the world's second largest economy and the biggest engine of growth over the last decade continue to fall, the outlook for the global economy remains uncertain.
Joe Davis, the global chief economist for the Vanguard Group, said, "Global growth has been frustratingly fragile in the last 3 years. It has been significantly lower than the cycle a decade ago, and there is little acceleration in any economy of the world right now."
Davis sees a convergence in growth rates occurring in the global economy, with emerging markets accounting for a significantly smaller share of the world growth than in the last 2 decades, and the developed markets are accounting for relatively more of it. This is not a cyclical downturn, but a long-term structural issue, Davis says.
The emerging markets as a group have been particularly vulnerable to the slowdown in the Chinese economy. Many have relied on debt-fueled investment and infrastructure spending in China to consume their commodity exports.
As China makes its transition into a slower-growing, consumer-oriented economy, its demand for everything from oil and base metals to industrial materials has marginally slipped and caused the prices of those commodities to plunge. China and the emerging markets have underperformed consensus growth estimates for the last 4 years, and most see little chance of reversing that trend in 2016. The Chinese government's fightful embrace for the free market policies for its currency and financial assets is also complicating matters.
If China doesn't become more open and capitalistic, they run the risk of falling into stagnation. The expectations for growth in the U.S. are too high. The Fed will have to lower its projections of how quickly interest rates will rise, says Brian Jacobson, Chief Portfolio Strategist at Wells Fargo Funds Management.
There will likely be more missteps in the short term, but most economists believe that the Chinese government still has enough foresight and foreign reserves to continue its reforms in the financial system. It's an impossible try to have an independent central bank, free capital movement, and a fixed currency, said Neil Detta, head of the Economic Research and Renaissance Macro Research.
In the U.S. economy, boring is good. The sluggish recovery of the U.S. economy since the financial crisis may have disappointed many economists, but there's a bright side to the picture. This has been an unlevered expansion, said Davis at Vanguard. Growth over the last 6 years has been 2% to 2.5% compared to 3.5% in the 80s and 90s, but this growth is more sustainable.
The deleveraging of consumer households and the refinancing of corporations with low interest debt has put the U.S. in a relatively better position than Europe and particularly China, and the emerging markets where private debt has risen dramatically in the last decade.
Most forms of consumer debt, notably credit card balances and mortgages, have declined in the U.S. since 2009, and the dynamic could reverse and the economy continues to show growth. Most forms of consumer debt, notably credit card balances and mortgages, have declined in the U.S. since 2009, and the dynamic could reverse as the economy continues to show growth.
Brian Jacobson, chief portfolio strategist at Wells Fargo Funds Management, said, "The trend is probably bottoming out and we may see an increase in consumer debt from here." Jacobson doesn't, however, think the economy is headed to the kind of growth and potential inflation that the Federal Reserve Bank appears to believe. He expects that the U.S. economy to grow by 2.5% this year, probably just slightly better than 2015.
The expectations for growth in the U.S. are too high, said Jacobson. The Fed will have to lower its projections of how quickly interest rates will rise. I think they'll only hike rates twice this year. He expects the U.S. economy to continue on a consistent, if uninspiring, growth trajectory, and is encouraging clients to look outside the U.S. for investment opportunities, largely because other economies stand a better chance of outperforming low expectations.
Just like Katy Perry warned in her song that a dark horse is something where the possible course of actions are unknown, Europe is just that, a dark horse, and could be the source of the biggest upside economic surprise.
You're right, Taylor. While the Syrian refugee crisis is challenging the European Union and its open border policy, the free movement of goods, services, and capital will remain intact.
A UK rejection of its current European Union membership, the Brexit referendum, is scheduled to take place before the end of 2017. It's a looming risk that could rattle the European and global markets, but Jacobson thinks that Europe will continue to show economic.
For those of you that don't know what the Brexit referendum is, it is this. Brexit is an abbreviation of British exit and refers to the possibility of Britain's withdrawal from the European Union. A referendum is a general vote by the electorate on a single political question that has been referred to them by a direct decision.
Anyways, the EU members said that this will be the demise of the European experiment. It may challenge people to reconsider what Europe should look like, but it will only make a slight difference. It has taken Europe longer to reform its banking sector post-financial crisis than the U.S.
Jacobson, chief portfolio strategist at Wells Fargo Funds Management, said European banks were shrinking their loan books up until the end of 2014. Now they're lending more, though they are still in the early stages of this change.
Indeed, few economists expect that the ECB will raise rates before the end of the decade, and accommodative monetary policy will finally spur European economists onto faster growth. Consensus estimates that the GDP growth in Western Europe this year are currently 1.5%, although some may disagree.
That is all for this segment on the global outlook in 2016, and that also concludes our newscast for today.
And have a good day from us. I have to do that. Okay.
Clearly.
I can't. Oh. We'll say the Europe. Okay.
That Europe.
I know. I got that. But Jacob's. Jeez. But Jacob.
Wait, what?
Created.
I lost track.
And stop. Okay. Now, how does a budget go about being passed?
Well, the president and the OMB write